Hey, Jerry.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Going well.
Hey,
Hey Cinder, you're on mute, buddy, but
Hey
you look
Jerry.
good.
Hey
Hey,
guys. Hey.
happy what day of the week? Thursday. All right.
Happy
You got your
one month.
coffee, fancy coffee, Jack.
fancy coffee,
I
fueling
like
up.
it. It's awesome. All right. Very cool. Um, Sammy, I think we can get started because we're probably gonna have a lot of things to talk through. So we can kick it off. And do you want me to? I can kick it off. You're on mute.
Yeah, go
Sounds
ahead,
good.
Jerry.
Sweet. Okay. Well, good morning, everyone. It is webinar time again. I feel like it's been some time, and we miss doing these things. It's just life has been busy, work has been busy, but we wanted to take some time today and walk you guys through some amazing things that folks at Softcrylic, as well as our clients, have been doing in the CDP space. The concentration of the topic today is going to be about leveraging the Adobe Real-Time Customer Data Platform, but beyond the known activation or beyond the known use cases. There's always a story that's being told about how the CDP allows you to bring audiences together, allows you to do segmentation, single view of the customer, all that fun stuff, and be able to activate on it in an omni-channel type of fashion. But there's also things that are not as sexy and things that are critical, where the CDP is solving some problems. So today we're going to go through that. I'm bringing with me two of my experts who have been actually working on these projects, and we'll be able to talk through in detail on what were the issues they were facing, how the CDP was able to solve for them. So we can kick it off with a quick round of introductions, and then we'll get started. I am Jerry. Hello. I co-lead the solution architecture group with Sundar, and I've been at Softcrylic for about 6.5 years. My day-to-day is helping clients in getting value out of their technology stack, whether it's identifying the right technology or figuring ways to get more use out of their tools. Sundar, pass it to you.
Thank you, Jerry. Hi, everyone. My name is Sundar Sridharan. My title here at Softcrylic is the Senior Director of MarTech Implementations. My primary role at Softcrylic is to design and architect marketing solutions for our clients and drive the implementation of those solutions, working closely with our clients, also with Softcrylic strategists and engineers. And I'm happy to be here to present an innovative use case that we worked with one of our clients.
Thank you, Sundar. Jack.
Yeah, thanks, Jerry. Hey guys, I'm Jack Roy. I'm a strategist and architect at Softcrylic. Been here for about 2.5 years now. Previously worked at Adobe, so pretty deep knowledge of a lot of the SaaS solutions, particularly AEP and the CDP, where I've been primarily living the last couple of years. Really excited to dive into the tool with you guys and discuss some advanced use cases we've been working on.
Sweet. And guys, I'm not going to have visibility into the chat, but please, if there's any questions that come up, plug them in there, and we'll be able to go back to them and hopefully answer them during the webinar. And if not, we'll make sure to list them when we do the recap on our website, which typically happens in a week or so. Okay. Jack, Sundar, you guys are seeing the PowerPoint. I just want to make sure I'm presenting the right screen.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. All right, so I talked a little bit about this, but I want to spend like maybe a few minutes just to really set the stage. Maybe there's some people here who are still new to the CDP. If you haven't heard about CDP, then good for you, because I feel like the CDP has been in our face for the past, I don't know, 5 years, where CDP this, CDP that, there's an institute, there's so many different flavors, there's now composable CDPs. It's like one of these long-lasting buzzwords, which is impressive. I thought the DMPs were long-lasting, but no, the CDPs really takes the drive. But let's talk about like what is the CDP supposed to do? I think the idea here, a lot of companies go after a CDP with the notion that they really want to have a single repository of their audiences. These are audiences that the marketers can go ahead and create without having dependency on data engineers and their IT team to pull the list for specific campaigns. If you ever look at anyone that is doing marketing operations today, you will hear that getting the lists ready for, or getting the audiences ready for campaigns is a big chunk of the process. And a CDP is supposed to come in and help with that. And how does it help? I think there's 4 things here that we're pointing out. One is this unified customer profile. And I think Adobe does a really good job in showing how a customer profile can be created, how it can come in from different fragments, from different sources and data sets, and the ability for you to see that profile being updated in semi-real time. And I say semi-real time just because depending on how this data is being loaded into the CDP, data can be loaded in real-time fashion, such as your site behavior, app behavior, maybe transactions, but some other stuff can be in batch, where depending on the technology that your organization has and how often it's able to pump the data into the CDP, you will see that profile being updated. The same thing, similar, but it goes also hand in hand, is the data streams, where the idea here is that as you are creating these profiles, now you're able to pump this data in and out of the CDP in a way that integrates with your own systems or with third-party systems that you're using for activation. This feeds into also the segmentation activation key of the CDP. Recently, Adobe have released something called composable, what is it called? Audience Composer, right? Did I get that right?
Yep.
Okay. So which is like the next phase, or I would say like segmentation on steroids. This answers a lot of questions around how I can be a little bit more advanced in my segmentation. Things that it's not just your logical things that can be created, but also the ability to split audiences, to be able to join different audiences together. So segmentation is a key part of the CDP, and activation. Activation can be in some cases replacing what you used to do in the DMP. The CDP does to a certain extent, tries to fill in that gap. I would say you need to be careful when you're trying to replace your DMP with a CDP, because they operate on different set of data. DMP operates on anonymous users, whereas CDP is on a known user. So there is ways to bridge that gap and be able to replace your DMP with a CDP, but also that requires some identity management and the ability to have that connection between your known and unknown, and having a good match rate in that case. And then finally, the integration and the extensibility. So in many cases, we want the CDP to solve tons of problems. And the more flexible that the CDP is, the better it's positioned to do so. Adobe being one of the leaders in the API first and friendly products makes the CDP very, very flexible. And I think this is where we're going to talk about today, about how the flexibility of the CDP allowed us to solve some of these advanced or some of these issues that were critical for our clients, and the CDP came in and solved them. All right, so let's talk through some of these. The first one, I'm just gonna set it up and actually have Jack and Sundar talk through it in detail. But the first one is connection or integrating the CDP to Braze. And one of the issues that we faced initially in integrating, this issue might not be as relevant anymore, but I would like the teams to talk about how we solved it. So Jack, do you want to just talk a little bit about what was the request or the need there, and what problems we ran into, and how did we end up with the solution that you guys came up with?
Yeah, sure, Jerry. So the crux of the original issue was that our client at the time had these mammoth segments. We're talking like 50 million plus profiles in these segments in the CDP. They wanted to activate these audiences within Braze for their marketing campaigns. However, at the time, the native integration between AEP and Braze was hitting some roadblocks, primarily due to API rate limiting. And this led to an incomplete transfer of profiles. To put it in perspective, when Sundar and I initially set this up for the client, millions of profiles were being left behind. And that's not a minor hiccup for this particular client. So what we did to fix this is, in collaboration with Adobe, we joined forces to craft a new native integration between the CDP and Braze. The goal was simple but crucial, to send profiles in smaller, more manageable sets using the API connection. To do this, we had to enable some throttling. So our solution ensured that the data flow was controlled, allowing Braze to efficiently handle the volume of profiles coming from AEP, particularly for these very large segments. We revamped the connector. So instead of sending profiles in mass on a first time load of the segment to Braze, it now batches 75 records for each API call. And it can handle around 50,000 calls per minute, which is great. And then post-integration, our client can now create and map these large segments without issues, ensuring that no customers are left behind for their campaigns. Leveraging the batch capabilities of the Braze APIs are really helpful. And the time taken to send these large segments has been drastically reduced. So, sorry, a lot of talking. Sundar, would you add anything to that?
Yeah, the one point that I wanted to add was like the time and the energy that we spent with Adobe to rebuild this new connector, because like there was a lot of like technical nuances in it. Like on the Braze side, there were a lot of like API throttling and API limitations were imposed at the same time. Like from an AEP perspective, we had to send these audiences at the right time to Braze. So there's a lot of data movement, and then the pipe was having limitations and rate limits. So it was very important for us to closely work with Adobe support, detailing them everything in details, particularly the logs of sending this data from AEP to Braze, and also like looking at the data volumes, audience sizes, and whatnot. Just pretty much like kind of a complete revamp that we had to work closely with Adobe support to build this new connector.
So let me ask you this. So this is an activation use case, but and I think when you initially started enabling this use case for the client, you didn't expect to run into this issue, right? The idea was Braze is a native connection, add it, get whatever, I don't know the details, but probably some API credentials, some account names, and then that's it. How did it come up with, like, what was initially, I would like to understand, how did you guys come to the conclusion that there's a throttling issue? Because, you know, you're sending data from the CDP, you're receiving it on Braze. I've been in this space for some time to know, like, two different systems do not speak the same language, so there might be a drop somewhere. But how do you narrow it down that this is something can be fixed on the CDP side versus this maybe something needs to be fixed on Braze? Like, walk me through how those initial things that you guys have done to narrow down the issue.
So the first thing that came to us was like, this is an issue with the CDP and the Braze integration. We were able to isolate that because with our client, there was another connection where from Google Cloud, GCP, we were sending some audiences to Braze. And that pipe was handling a lot of data and sending a lot of data. So that pipe was working very well. That's when we realized that this particular issue is isolated to AEP CDP and the Braze, and then we were able to compare the pipeline that was working and with the pipeline that was established between the AEP CDP and Braze. We were able to point out the rate limits, the data volumes, and all those stuff.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
And just to add to that, we could also see within the CDP that on the initial load of a new segment to Braze, we were seeing a lot of failures within the reporting in the CDP. But as new profiles were added to the segment and sent off to Braze, we didn't see those errors. So it was an issue with this initial large set of profiles being batched correctly in the API calls to be sent to the activation platform.
Okay. I have a question, and then there's a question in the chat I would like to address since we're on the topic here. Just for folks who haven't worked with Braze, can either of you just say like a 30-second explaining what Braze is?
Yeah, you want me to do it, Sundar?
Okay. Yeah, go for it. Go for it, Jack.
Yeah. So Braze is a marketing automation or activation platform. If you're familiar with like the Adobe equivalent would probably be AJO, which allows you to build campaigns based off of triggers or segments within the tool. Braze is just another vendor that does this very well. And then has this connection from RTCDP that can ingest segments to trigger those types of campaigns.
Okay, great. So the question that is here, and I don't know if we have a full answer because I don't think we do much on Braze for this particular client, but the question was, did you face any issues with Braze data points while activating these many profiles? Are you guys aware if there was any difficulties on the client side?
Yeah, so we know that within Braze, the way that their pricing model works is they charge by data point. So as you bring in more attributes related to that data, your costs can go up.
So not profile, but profile along with data points. Okay.
Right. Exactly. So what the client does is they use the CDP as the aggregator for all of their first-party data. They build their segments in the CDP, and then they send those off to Braze, and it's just the identities for the most part, unless they have to use some attribute for personalization within a message. But most of that is piped in directly from their data warehouse. So they get around a lot of the costs, or at least the cost increases that way. I don't know, Sundar, if you would add anything to that.
Yeah, you put it right. Put it rightly, Jack. Like from Adobe RTCDP, most of the time, like the audiences that we sent included the identifiers with some additional attributes. Whereas there was another connection that actually sent all the data related to the customers through a GCP ingestion. So in Braze, the attributes of the customers were already in there. From AEP, we mostly send the member attributes with some additional attributes when needed.
Okay, so I think I would say the short answer is there was no known issues with activating that many profiles, but the one thing that needed to be managed was how the number of attributes in the system, so that they don't hit like a really expensive bill with overages, which is typically happens, but that's something that is critical in this case. Okay, great. All right, so let's move to the next topic. All right, I'm really excited about this one because I feel like this one is something that not many people, well, in general, you would say, yes, this is how a CDP should be used, but also seeing that in reality is difficult. And I think this proved how difficult it is, but we were able to work through it. So this next use case is under the title Retail Media Success and the ability of attributing offline sales to online behavior. Sundar, this is something I work closely with you on. Do you want to just walk us through like what was the issue, what we were trying to do, and then what difficulties we faced, and then the solution that you put together?
Fantastic. Yeah, it's a very very interesting journey that we took for this use case. So thank you, Jerry. Yeah. So first of all, this is a use case that we implemented for one of our prestigious clients, a member-only wholesale department store with significant online and brick-and-mortar presence. Our client was venturing into this retail media network. So by the way, RMN is when a retailer establishes an advertisement platform across their digital properties in their network, right? So RMN actually builds a win-to-win relationship between both retailers and advertisers, right? So it enables brands to target retail consumers directly when they are in the shopping experience, tailoring their ads based on demographics, interest, and also purchase history. And on the other side, for retailers, RMNs generate revenue by spelling the ad space, as well as getting more value out of their customer data, and also enhancing the customer experience by driving an increased sales. So our client was successfully able to run the advertising campaigns through a third-party media platform. But the real challenge was they struggled to measure the true performance of the ad campaigns, because with the third-party media platform, they had a limitation in connecting the online interactions with offline sales. So there was a gap in the data, where the in-store sales were not attributed to the ad interactions happening on the digital properties. So this lack of cross-channel visibility made it impossible for our client to do a robust attribution reporting, right? So without understanding how these ads drove the offline sales, our client was not able to optimize the ad campaigns or prove a strong return on ad spends like ROAS to their retail media partners. So the real challenge was basically online interactions were not connected to the offline sales. So we work closely with our client to resolve this business challenge, right? So our client has already invested in Adobe Experience Platform, the real-time customer data platform, where we were building a comprehensive 360-degree view of the customer data coming from e-commerce site, apps, emails, and also data coming from this brick-and-mortar stores, the offline data. So with AEP, we had both the online interactions and the offline transaction data. So that made us to decide, okay, we will use AEP data as a single source of truth for this attribution reporting. So what we did is we did a quick POC to build a data pipeline outside of AEP to extract the online and offline data from AEP in an automated fashion. And we delivered the data to the third-party platform, our client's third-party platform, to do the attribution and reporting. We did this as a POC, and then during the POC, what we discovered was there was another challenge with the third-party attribution provider. The third-party attribution provider was not able to support multiple device IDs associated with the customer. We had a 28 days attribution window, so a customer can use multiple devices and browsers to interact with the ads in this 28 days. But we were not able to send all of the data to the third-party provider, and then they were not able to process that. So what we did is we came back to the drawing board again, and we came up with another solution where we shifted the responsibility of identifying the advertisements to Adobe Analytics. Basically, what we did is we came up with a solution to tag the customer's interactions with the advertisements, through Adobe Analytics tagging. So our client has already invested in Adobe Analytics web and mobile SDK implementations. So we utilize the implementations, and then we enhance the implementation to start tagging all the advertisements. And then what we did is we were able to take that advertising impressions and clicks data, and were able to match the offline sales transactions that happened in the stores. So overall, the solution had this approach. We used Adobe Analytics tagging to capture in real time the promotions that were displayed in our clients' websites and mobile apps. Then we built a serverless data pipeline using AWS Lambda to get the data of both the online interactions as well as the offline transactions, and then we matched them to build a data feed. And then we further enhanced those data for attribution reporting through this AWS data pipeline. And finally, we send the data feed to our third-party provider on a daily basis. So with this solution, by using the data that was there in AEP, what we found was there was a projected outcome of 10% lift in the conversion, and there was a strong ROAS for our client to showcase that to their retail media partners. So although the core purpose of customer data platforms like AEP is to build customer profiles and create audiences and activate those audiences across various different channels, in this use case, what we did was we used AEP data for attribution reporting that really empowered our client to showcase an RMN success.
Thank you, Sundar. Yeah, I think in general, I hear that use case a lot, right? I hear that, hey, all your data is in the CDP, so now you can do attribution in the CDP, right? Because the data is there. But the piece that is missing is that the CDP itself is not a reporting platform. Now, in your case or this client case, they had an existing relationship with a third-party platform that ingested that data and was able to report on it, attribute it, and get it to the vendors and suppliers. Do you think that if this client had a product like Customer Journey Analytics, for example, would have they been able to do the same thing?
Yes, definitely. CJA would be a viable option for doing attribution reporting. But in this case, why we didn't choose CJA, because our clients' media partners, the brands, were already using the third-party media platforms reporting solution for online to online attribution reporting. So the only missing piece was the online to offline reporting. So we don't want to create a separate system and a separate reporting dashboard for offline to online attribution for the client's media partner. That's why we just stopped at the process of generating the data and giving it to the third-party media platform.
That makes sense. That I think that is that's an important piece because sometimes the process and what people are used to, shifting them to something new can be a big step, right? So the ability that you were able to, one, do this with the help of the CDP, but with a different platform, and two, utilizing, I see in the diagram, you use a lot of AWS to get the data, get it ready to be sent to the platform. Was there a way could there have been a scenario where you were able to do what you did in AWS using Adobe I/O, for example, or there what was needed required some advanced things that the CDP and Adobe couldn't address?
Yeah, the reason why we used an infrastructure like AWS for this work is basically like this required a lot of like data processing because we were doing a high volume of data processing within with that needs to be matched for building this attribution reporting. This could have been done in AEP using their like query services, but the when we did the POC, like what we were able to find is like because the query services has to deal with a lot of data sets and data, we saw like the pipelines were running really for a very long time, and sometimes they were timing out. So what we did is like so we don't want to put a load on AEP because AEP was already ingesting a lot of data, and then there were like audience segmentation evaluations were happening. There's a lot of load on AEP. So we found like okay, let's take this whole data feed processing out of AEP and do it in AWS because our client already had investments on AWS. At the same time, the data feed has to be generated on a daily basis and pushed to the client's third-party platform only once a day. So it was very easy for us to create a serverless data pipeline in AWS rather than like pushing all this load into AEP.
Excellent. And I know, Sundar, you are working on an official white paper that will be published on the Softcrylic website that discuss this in a little more detail. So we'll make sure to tag it when the recap when we have this up, so people can learn more about the solution. Great, thank you. All right, let's go to the next one. I love this one. I think this one was so creative. I'm not gonna say anything about it. I'm gonna give it to Jack because I want Jack to talk through this. Jack and I come from the background of the DMP. So when this came up, we're like, we know what the problem is, but how can we solve it? So Jack, walk us through it. What was the problem we're trying to solve here?
Yeah, so the gist of the issue here is, and I'm sure everyone on this call, panelists and attendees, we all know the issue. We're seeing a significant shift in cookie dynamics. We've been seeing it like snowball for years now. But finally, we are getting to a point where these, primarily first-party tools like the CDP are starting to have issues connecting to typical cookie-based destinations, advertising tools, right? So essentially engaging these anonymous audiences through native integrations has become a challenge. Specifically when we talk about the direct link between AEP and Google Ads. In the past, there were third-party cookie-based integrations that would satisfy sending pure anonymous audiences from Adobe tools to Google Ads. Like this is a very typical DMP use case, like Jerry was saying. But now Google Ads and advertising platforms in general are starting to require first-party IDs as the linkage that's sent from these tools. Obviously, that presents a predicament when we're trying to send pure anonymous audiences off for retargeting, prospecting, those types of use cases, right? So with this specific client, they also had a couple additional Adobe tools that we were actually able to leverage in some very creative ways to send these anonymous audiences from the CDP to the advertising platform, namely Adobe Target. And if you are not familiar with Adobe Target is a additional tool solution that Adobe offers. It's primarily used for optimization, personalization on websites and apps. But for this use case, we used it in a some might say hacky, I would say creative way, where we essentially create a Google tag in Google Ads, which is basically just a conversion or a beacon indicator, and then deploy that Google tag within an XT activity that's tied to an anonymous CDP audience. So that way, when our anonymous visitors are segmented based on behavioral activity on the site, they trigger that XT activity that contains the tag. And then the tag will pipe the visitor over to Google Ads for retargeting. So we essentially use Adobe Target as like a tag manager, like a TMS. But yeah, so the value of this, obviously the main value is that we're able to push these anonymous audiences off to Google Ads. Our client is now running campaigns off of these audiences, which is great. I think the main benefit is this entire endeavor exemplifies thinking outside the box, making the most of existing tools in new and novel ways. And despite the evolving advertising backdrop, the client's needs were effectively and efficiently met. Very exciting
Jack,
stuff. Mm-hmm.
It's super exciting. Let me ask you a couple questions just to highlight like why we had to go that way. So, okay, it's a Google Ads connection. I know that there is in CDP today native connection to Google Ads. What was the problem there? Why couldn't we, onboard data that way?
Yeah. So the native connection for Google Ads and for a lot of advertising platforms now is predicated on a first-party identifier, right? First-party identifier being like an email or phone number or
stuff. Yeah.
Right. So with an anonymous audience, obviously we're not going to have those types of IDs for those profiles within the segment, right? It's just going to be a collection of cookies and a bunch of behavioral event data associated with that cookies. So passing those audiences to Google Ads, at least from the CDP, is essentially impossible unless you use a solution like this that can identify the visitor on the site and push them off to the platform.
So let's break it into an example. So if I am a business who has a high authentication type of business, right? FSI, I will probably have a high match of a lot of my anonymous visitors will be actually known visitors, right? So that I can use the native integration with a high match rate. But if I'm a business that doesn't authenticate as much, and my authentication to anonymous is not a big match, then I'm gonna run into this issue. Is that a true statement?
100%. Yeah, and,
Okay.
and that was the essential issue that this client was facing, is that they have properties that have very low authentication. They're a B2B client, so not a lot of reason for their visitors to authenticate, at least at this moment in time. A lot of clients that have more informative properties and do less like e-commerce and those types of activations are going to face these issues. So finding these types of solutions to those problems are going to become more and more important for sure.
Got it. Another question. So why couldn't we, since they're anonymous, right?
Yeah.
Why couldn't I just take that tag, the Google tag, and drop it in my tag manager and have it fire the same way you do it in Target using Target. But why couldn't I do that on the TMS directly, like the normal way of implementing a retargeting pixel, for example?
Yep. Yeah. So the idea is we want to be able to use the CDP segment, right? The CDP segment has RTCDP has a native integration with Adobe Target. Whether you're on the Web SDK or on a legacy implementation, you are able to pipe those segments built in the CDP over to Target very, very easily for the most part. With the TMS, there's not a like native integration to push the segment over to the tag manager. I'm sure there's a way you could potentially do that, but
I think actually the main reason for that, not to cut you off, but just so that to highlight, because we thought about that. I remember we sat down and thought about, well, yeah, we can use the pixel from in the TMS, but the problem is, although it's anonymous, this client had one of the use cases was that they had multiple brands, right, and a lot of brands, and they wanted to know when someone was going from one brand to another, and then figure out which of these brands they want to retarget them on, right? So the idea here, if that was done on the TMS level or the data layer, as Vivek is asking, there is no intelligence layer to merge that anonymous visitor behavior across multiple sites. So instead, it will be one direction, right? Because the TMS doesn't have that layer of saying, oh, Jerry went to site A and site B and site C. I know that Jerry is on site A because this is where the TMS is. So I think what the CDP came in here to shine was, hey, I still can do segmentation based on anonymous, but across multiple brands. And also there might be some advanced about like number of visits, number of pages, like some things so that your segmentation is a little bit more advanced. And then you're feeding this to Target to do that, to also, I think related to this, the way you guys set up the solution was scalable, right? Yeah. Where on the Google side, you guys utilize something like a smart pixel, right? Where you can send something with different fields, and depending on the fields, you can segment different audience. So it's not like you need a different pixel every time. This can be just depending on how data is feeding from the CDP to Target, how Target is packaging it, sending it to Google. It just can scale up. Is that accurate?
Exactly. So, and also to add to that, so within the XT activity, we're able to, so it's one XT activity for essentially like 14 different brands that can be utilized to send the segment for, it was a cross-brand use case, right? Mm-hmm. So that was the whole idea, is you have an anonymous audience that's identifying people who visit one site and then also visit another specific site to do some cross-brand targeting. So yeah, you're right. One audience in the CDP, one XT activity, and one pixel. It's not, and it is scalable. It doesn't require a ton of setup once you prove out the solution. So
yeah, and I think the idea of having this in the data layer attribute, it's doable. Vivek, to your question, but the concern here would be, now there's a development that needs to happen where we are sending the data from the CDP to the page. If someone needs to pick it up, like even we looked at the TMS to leverage the APIs, the Adobe APIs, where when someone is on the page, use Profile API to go and get the data and then send it to Google. But we found Target was like the best way. It didn't require more cost, and it doesn't change the experience. And the match rates were great. I don't know. Do you know, Jack, what was the lift in match rates compared to when we had this from the CDP directly to Google Ads? I think you're seeing crazy numbers.
Yeah, it's pretty high. I mean, we're so just to give you some full perspective, this was a months-long project getting this like proved out. But once we started turning it on, which was essentially just a couple weeks ago, we started seeing I don't know, it was like probably 70 to 80% match rates, which is very high. The thing to keep in mind is if you have anonymous audiences that are already built, once you turn this on, the Google Ads segment is only going to populate on new data. So old data, historical data, this solution doesn't solve for that, because
The
that
match rate is going to increase as you go, similar as a DMP
right. Exactly.
connection.
Yeah. Yeah. Because the visitor needs to identify themselves on the site after they've already been segmented. So, and for some customers, depending on your implementation, if you're Web SDK or not, that might necessitate another visit to the site in order for that segment member to actually be identified within Google Ads. So,
okay,
something to keep in mind.
Thank you, Jack. Excellent. I love this one. All right. Related to this, I think it's the same client. You guys did some amazing work using Data Distiller, which is, I don't know, one of you need to explain what Data Distiller is. It's just query service on steroids. But the idea here was there was a case that we need to solve for, that the data that is coming in was not in the right form. Sundar, do you want to talk about that? How you guys leverage Data Distiller?
Yeah, definitely. So let's start with what is a data distiller, right? So data distiller is a additional SKU in Adobe Experience Platform or CDP. Basically, it gives you the capabilities to do transformations inside AEP. So with query services, the vanilla query services, like you won't be able to do a lot of transformations. But with data distiller added as an add-on to the query services, you'll be able to do all sort of complex transformations. In terms of like the performance, right? Like running a query and transforming the data distiller is way better than the query services. So in this use case, like for this client, this is basically like we were trying to merge the online data and also like the offline data that's coming from Salesforce Marketing Cloud into a unified profile in AEP. So what we found is from a Salesforce Customer Cloud perspective, it was not Salesforce Marketing Cloud, it was Salesforce Customer Cloud. From the Salesforce Customer Cloud, as Jerry and Jack mentioned, the client had lots of brands, and then there were a lot of these lead records. They were not like, synced together. There were lots of missing identities, missing data. So we had a list of transformations that we need to do on the Salesforce Sales Cloud data before getting ingested into AEP. It's kind of like a pre-CDP work that we had to do to prep the data before getting into RT-CDP. So what we did is like we created most of these transformations using this data distiller product that basically looked at the customer record, went through the customer record, record by record, identified the missing data. And there were also a lot of other lookup tables that we were using to enrich and augment the Salesforce data with the data distiller. And then using AEP data distiller, we were able to enrich and augment the data and also do the transformations and prep the data in such a way that it can be useful for this B2B as well as B2C use cases in a B2C data model within AEP. So mostly there were lots of transformation that was required, and the client's engineering team didn't have time and energy to work on those transformations. So basically they asked guys, can you guys take this transformation task on your own and do it? So that's why we use the data distiller and then had all this data preparations done and push the data into RT-CDP. From there, it was used for audience segmentation and activation.
Yeah, I think this is something probably marketers or the power users of the CDP won't know that this is happening, but for the data to be ready to execute on their use cases, I think this is needed. So I think the data distiller here solved a really good problem. I'm happy that we were able to leverage it, because at the time we did this, the data distiller was still like kind of brand new. So we did like the first kind of drive through it, and it seems like it's something that has proven to work really well in these cases. Cool. All right, we got 9 minutes left, and I think this is the last one, so we're doing great on time. Kiosk personalization. This is really interesting. Personalizing on Kiosk using the CDP sounds like a very cool, sexy use case, but I think the way that you guys, what problems you solved here was using the CDP to bridge a gap. Jack, do you want to talk through what was the problem that you were facing with this?
Yeah, sure. So the general, the context is, our client is a major restaurant chain, and they're looking to integrate Adobe Target into their kiosks within their cafes, so that they can, amplify their personalization capabilities on those devices. And just to give you guys some additional insight, the kiosk is essentially just an iPad with an app over the top. So central to this project was addressing this what we call sessionization challenge linked to the kiosk analytics data. At the time, the Experience Cloud ID, the ECID, was not resetting after each kiosk order. And if we were to pipe this into AEP without addressing the sessionization issue, that would pose a gigantic risk of profile collapse, where essentially as people would be logging into these kiosk sessions, their known profiles would stitch together off of the ECID, which would be a huge issue in AEP. So the goal was to roll out enhancements to these kiosk apps without fully migrating their application to the AEP Web SDK and Edge Network, which would have been a very large effort that the client just was not ready for at the time. So what we did was we worked with the client to update the core extensions and SDKs alongside the Adobe solutions for the kiosk system. So updating analytics, implementing Target, and implementing AEP stitching on the devices, while delaying the shift to the Edge network for the time being. By following this route, the client was able to reset the ECIDs, which is crucial. We are now able to stitch known sessions to their kiosk orders, which provides a lot of opportunities for personalization on the kiosk, but also targeting on other platforms, right? Because we can use that kiosk data to build segments and retarget, in other areas. So it was a huge effort. We're talking about, I think around 5,000 to 6,000 kiosks across the country that was involved in this project. A lot of validation was involved to make sure that we didn't see any profile collapse. And as of today, we're seeing steady growth in profiles coming in from these devices, and also behavioral data being added to known profiles in AEP.
So Jack, with when you say the reset of the ECID, was that just like a logic implemented on the TMS to be like when someone logs out, for example, or after a timeout, you're resetting?
Yeah, exactly. So within a kiosk session, there's essentially I forget the exact name the client uses, but it's essentially like a splash screen at the beginning of the session. The idea was when that screen is shown, the ECID is reset, and then a new ECID is instantiated for the next session. I don't think it's done within the TMS. I think it's done within the application directly.
Okay.
But I just want to keep in mind for everybody that this solution was built specifically this way because the client is not on the Web SDK. If they were on the Web SDK, there's a method that you can use to easily reset the session. But we had to go this custom route because they were on the older version.
Okay. And then we were able now to get audiences from the CDP to be used on the kiosk.
Exactly.
And these audiences, well, these attributes associated with these audiences are accurate, right? Like there's no issues to be like, oh, there might be like, I'm saying Jerry qualified for this audience, but actually it's Jack that is on the kiosk, and Jack loves salads while Jerry loves turkey, or whatever we're ordering, and then it's completely different experience.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Yes. So that's how we personalize on the kiosk now is if you're logged in, if you're authenticated on that session, you receive some personalization based on, things that we know about you or that you've shared with the client. One thing to also keep in mind is the way that this implementation works on the personalization side, because they're not on Web SDK, is if you're already qualified for a certain audience in the CDP, no problems. Like you will see the target experience or activity based off of that qualification. But if you qualify for a CDP segment technically within the kiosk session itself, we are actually using a target attribute to identify you within the session so that we can personalize for you, because they're not on Web SDK.
Segmentation, yeah.
Right. So because without Web SDK, you don't get that same session personalization ability. We have to also utilize the target attributes to do that type of personalization. So just something to keep in mind.
No, that's really good to know. Yeah, go ahead, Sundar.
Yeah, one thing to remind here is that like this whole implementation required an app change and release the app changes to all the kiosks.
Yeah.
So if we take a Web SDK route, like we don't have to worry much about like app changes.
Exactly. Yeah, and then the app change, obviously, it really expanded the amount of time it took to get this going. It went from what probably could have been a couple of weeks to really a few months to get this working.
Yeah. There's one more question. I think that's probably the last one. I think related to this, Vivek is asking, can this been done using delivery API with AEP segments? Sundar, I don't know how that would be done, or why would there be a need for delivery API, but do you think that could have been an option to solve this problem?
Yes, this could have been an option, but still like the delivery API requires you to do some changes to the app, because from the app you have to, through Adobe I/O, reach out to the delivery API, get the data. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this could have been an option for sure, but as the client was already using Adobe Target, we are sending segments from AEP to Target, we took the Target route.
Yeah, and also fundamentally, the issue was the resetting of the ECIDs. Yep. We didn't even have the data in AEP at the time because of that issue.
Yeah. So now you fix the problem on the kiosk. Now the data is in AEP. Segmentation going back to the kiosk now is accessible. Okay, great. guys, we are on time, and I really, I mean, I love talking to you. I hope our listeners enjoyed that. Thank you so much. If there's any questions, please reach out to us. We will have this is already recorded, so we'll have it up on our website with some recap of the key points. And if anyone have another use case or question about the CDP, please reach out to us. Jack and I and Cinder are reachable on LinkedIn. And also you can email us at info@softcrylic.com, and that will be routed to one of us. All right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks,
Talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.